What if our systems aren't failing? What if they're functioning exactly as trauma designed them to do? Hierarchical Trauma Systems, or HTS, a framework for understanding power, trauma, and why change fails. For a long time, I kept noticing the same patterns repeating across completely different spaces: families, workplaces, schools, institution, politics. Different people, different ideologies, different languages, but the same power dynamics. The same roles, the same punishment of truth tellers, the same cycles of harm repeating even after leadership changes, reforms, revolution, cultural resets. Eventually, I stopped asking, why are these systems broken? And I started asking a totally different question. What if they're doing exactly what they were built to do? We already have a lot of strong frameworks for understanding harm. We have trauma theory, we have family systems theory, we have critical race theory, we have organizational psychology, we have political economy. Each of these explains part of the picture, but none of them on their own fully explain why the same patterns reproduce across scale, from families to organizations to entire societies, even when people genuinely want change. Why replacing leaders doesn't work, why reform keeps stalling, why new language gets absorbed without power ever actually shifting, why harm keeps regenerating in new forms. What felt missing was a way to explain how trauma becomes structural and how structure then reproduces that trauma. I call this framework HTS, or Hierarchical Trauma Systems. HTS describes how unprocessed trauma gets organized into hierarchy, roles, and control, and how those structures then reproduce trauma across time and scale. In short, trauma doesn't just live in people's nervous systems. It gets built into our very systems itself. And once it's built into systems, it becomes normalized, defended, and very difficult to see. A hierarchical trauma system is any family, organization, or society where power is stacked vertically, and the people at the top manage their unresolved trauma through control of those beneath them, rather than through accountability or processing grief. These systems are defined by a few core features: trauma concentrated at the top, control used as regulation, harm displaced downward, roles used to stabilize the system, truth being framed as a threat. This isn't about individual bad actors, it's about self-protective architecture. What makes HTS so powerful is that it's fractal. The same structures repeat across scale: micro, families. Families are where trauma logic is first learned. Children adapt to unsafe or unpredictable environments by taking on roles: scapegoat, golden child, invisible one, parentified child. These roles are not personality traits, they're survival strategies. Hierarchy becomes emotionally encoded as normal before it's ever questioned. Meso, school and workplaces. Schools and workplaces translate family trauma logic into formal systems: surveillance, ranking, punishment, reward. Fawning becomes professionalism. Hypervigilance becomes work ethic. Dissociation becomes objectivity. Trauma doesn't disappear, it becomes institutionalized and legitimized. Macro, society. At the societal level, the same logic becomes law, policy, and enforcement. Entire populations are assigned roles. They're criminalized, marginalized, parentified, idealized, scapegoated. Oppression isn't random, it's hierarchical trauma at scale. HTS persists through roles, not just rules. Roles emerge to stabilize the system under threat, but once established, those roles become self-reinforcing. Scapegoats absorb blame. Golden children legitimize the system. Enablers protect power. Invisible labor keeps everything running. These roles are portable because they're stored in our individual nervous systems, not just our structures. Organizations and societies function as collective nervous systems, mirroring the same threat response patterns we see in individuals. That's why the same story keeps repeating in different settings, why hierarchy isn't the problem. HTS does not argue that all hierarchy is bad. Hierarchy becomes destructive when it functions as a maladaptive trauma response rather than a structure for care and responsibility. In healthy systems, authority contains harm. Power is accountable. Hierarchy is flexible and responsive. In trauma-based systems, hierarchy functions as control. Control replaces repair. Power avoids accountability. Grief is avoided. And here's the key insight. When grief is structurally avoided, trauma gets organized into hierarchy. Grief is a regulatory process. Without it, systems externalize that pain as domination. This brings us to the most important part. Hierarchical trauma systems persist because they are self-concealing. Systems organized around trauma displacement interpret visibility as a threat. Truth tellers get punished, whistleblowers become problems, the system tightens control. So attention stays focused on changing leaders, changing language, changing policies, while the underlying trauma logic remains untouched. What looks like transformation on the surface often functions as systemic adaptation. HTS isn't an answer or a solution, it's simply a lens, one that helps explain why the same dynamics keep repeating and why change so often fails, even when intentions are good. Naming the architecture doesn't dismantle the system, but once you see the logic clearly, it can't be mistaken for inevitability again. I've published the full framework for anyone that wants to engage more deeply. This is a working theory. It's meant to be tested, critiqued, refined, and most importantly, applied. But once you see it, you start seeing it everywhere.